Manit eterno fora tenescere. Man ene shorokaran. Kiaran. Kiaran. That's the signing. Lena, welcome. Y'all can hear like cats running around, making playful fighting sounds. Nice to see you, Pod.
Likewise.
What's up, Huda? The dress is banging you. Oh, wow. The fluoro green nails. Woo. Oh, I guess it's more like a Kelly green. Golfing green. Nothing like seeing a cat jumping towards you. It's like so graceful. Om se anini shol kate ara from sarate kene. Shin efte netara kram shatene kaliana. Sifamon shoroma. Sifamoni erash. Umat ene shirne kene. Shiene. Shiene. I'm very curious why my body is being like feeling it. I'll say like processing it so heavily today. I'll say the usual thing I say at the beginning of this container in some like arrangement, which is that this container is still like probably the only container where I'm relatively strict with the time. And also the guarantee that I feel moved to give to anybody who's in this container or watching this container or tuning into it. Outside of time or immaterially, the guarantee is that nothing that happens in this container will create or reify karma. And also that I will, well, I'll say that the things that happen in this container will unravel karma, which is appropriate to unravel, which is quite a guarantee. The other thing that I always say in this container is that if you feel like the guarantee has been breached in any way, then I would love for you to let me know. Or to bitch about me in public behind my back. Not that anybody's done that recently, gosh. Or tried to DM people who are closer to me than they are to them, telling them that I am the Archon carrier. It was me all along, disintegrating the body of Adonai. It's like, I don't know why they would give me that much credit, but yeah, like I said, if you want to pull questions from any of the threads in the Why Am I Like This channel, or if you want to ask any novel questions, I'm open to that. I guess I'm gonna like go through and look for a few myself, which I haven't already answered, which is just one, and that took like about 45 minutes and involved me getting disconnected at like, I think it was like 22 minutes and 22 seconds and reconnecting at exactly 27 minutes. Oh, okay. So I'll answer this question. And I am aware of the idea that it might be presumptuous for me to feel that I'm worthy of being asked questions that people want people want me to respond to, but it happens. Oh, really? Okay, I'm going to answer this question, I think. How do you work with karma? And I'm going to answer one more question. And, ooh. The question is, how do you conceptualize eldership? I guess no one else has asked any questions. That's a lot of questions for like 45 minutes. So I'll see how everything shows up. I guess I'll start with a little bit of light language and spirit tongue. I say I only allow what is for the cosmic time of each and every being and the collective beingness of the one I know as Shekinah. And I'm bringing forth a light language transmission from Shekinah and a spirit tongue transmission from the one known as Set, who I know is the star Betelgeuse in the constellation named Orion, and a transmission of light language from the one I know as Anubis, or Sirius A. And I'll start now. Ki porumane te tare sefte bom sharate akia te tarasom fiat ansare te tashta. Hiete era fokorane te shem fornin en set ert or tenestekt. For tenemo franeste. Tambor shatene she te for eknenesha. Niam forum sit esh katataratin sokaneneat. Sarden pofram shit or te karane. Mandi ir posota. Shed elmort emfat en steter takanamot. Siftiter shumbo frateten machinikatet. Musonish terkt tamor. Manuse. Katetere mokorte muk. Shikanet amborte meshenet anistene mokunerit emokutek. Harisham. Sa. Harisham forum sakatitrenean. Fumian inise fort. Site jarnish vektort. Hara moran in de jartekadiste. Fiem ienama. Fiem iemana akakorana kami akukara kakinaka. Satimo kanakati. Shokora kanikatise. Shokora kokakanine nesharte. Mafte porumattora kanana kadite shtekanesa neshtedara kamokotiste. huorashatita manandarete mufukumasa tiano mashate tarakata pormeste cum anni titrishamat satakate enest animorokoniane femasa me enemoro tefte mustora tefte patata dorota takalokate tanine mamiokogi tukade kumsadene nadema ema kamoroksh tekradesha kiat parfte poma si enemoro te anishtare mushora nfa titaneshta tia testa porosta anestete na foresta bofta enetete hakarat timotanda antasam shapofra tasa katete mafatine sit ota tatarata nishta katene nasut kata arakate tenaka se arashta si ashta paranashta konene letetre matefta katete mututaraneshta fa solo fokarane katepa hunsete tarashta katete shtete musut sapumasta karate katamu for katenak kiarashka poromasa kianashara retakaisha pum stani sharapuftaris shananamafa retkamofan ansianishtoda kadishta tata Fopparanista po korahtakim siet eertamusoret enistet takadaborpatetemeneste tätä supharat paramatipst tätä karot furon sopat irstupaninata fip eer paparamatikitaramo shortarataka anisha kur kania ka kur kaniesha niaratsambuf katene sa Hanik enitiirtofum sorotetsha sitieteromusota karanesteenemokot enemafti shammatiteromo sam anisharet aeramusoto faporomatakati arash haniaramokoranine kadid atir sharamusot inisha shianam forate aramokoru kadienelatani shatetaramusu sipon sap Kup arestator musukupa manista titerete pukuma titerasto teina taterete sa karamukuma satista. Mm. Oh. Sapien rotetorita porish. Foi arasat enamus god at. Sharasat sorash enid emil forasat eremoniana taratakatidesh. Foi sikati aktideromokonemishe. Shim iarashambur katidernesa. Sapurumat shita nemofak. Kai karuka de arati termi amiko amishania. Ora kanine. Ora kanini akiedi iero from sid eniste. Kam kurak tikatini muda rishete te perene steen. Ora kadideria kadibene. Kukanene kietere. Kaptete kapane kanine. Nakadikane kopetakin. Pakanatini kanakune katikon. Katikapetani. Kungara kakene kia. Yeah. So yeah, I guess like mm, one of the reasons why I call this container "Why Am I Like This" is because like people say it all the time. Um, and I think that in the last session of "Why Am I Like This," I talked about like how people making sounds and then the symbols which are related to those sounds, and also the sense impressions, especially in the upper chakras, that relate to people's receptions of those sounds, um, are like one way that terma can accumulate. So the fact that people use "Why am I like this" all the time makes it makes it like a pretty interesting pit to turn into a mountain, I would say. I'd say like for the most part, when I hear people saying it, it's kind of like it's not really a question. It's kind of like more of a statement. Like, I don't know why I'm like this, but I'm okay with it. And I think like that's something that can be celebrated in some contexts. But um, when I was a young and impressionable person, I learned about the concept of détournement or détournement, which is to like try and turn things around and use them in ways which shed new light upon them. And I feel like there's a lot of potential for me to like answer this question earnestly and to turn this like quarry into a volcano, perhaps astrally. And also, I think like an opportunity to talk about things which apply to a lot of people from my perspective and from my experience, which I feel like is not something that can be said of a lot of spiritual material. I feel like a lot of it is extremely depersonalized and also decontextualized in a way that causes it to become very sticky. And when I say sticky, I mean it causes people to stick to it, but also to bring so-called wisdoms out of like decontextualized spaces into context where it's not necessarily appropriate. Um, and uh, yeah, I feel like taking questions from the context of why am I like this and answering them in a way that fits the constraints of talking about why I'm like this uh, allows me to say some things, and then people can take whatever they want out of them. And maybe that's truth, maybe that's wisdom, maybe it's like, I can't wait to roast this guy on TikTok. But either way, I trust what becomes of it. So the first question, I think Lexi asked me this, and I kind of reworded it. But the question that I have reformulated is, how have relationships with others helped you to cultivate your relationship with yourself? I think the question was originally phrased with respect to the broom. And I don't want to speak to that alone, but I'll say that often people get the impression that the broom is just like something that belongs to me. And I'll say that it's never belonged to me. It started out as a group chat called the Breathing Room. I won't name who created it. It became too large and too multivalence to remain a Twitter group chat. And so it became a Discord server, and then it became another Discord server. And I'd say like a lot of people who might submit to being grouped as like Teapot ended up in this server during like the peak of the pandemic, talking about a lot of the experiences that they either brought into the pandemic or had during the pandemic relating to things which people might call like woo. At least that's my experience. And then, of course, as often happens in spiritual circles or any type of circle which is united by a projection of a shared set of beliefs, there were conflagrations and conflicts. And as often happens when conflicts can't be resolved by the shared awareness of material evidence, these conflicts led to rupture. And what happened, or what was happening when like the first major rupture occurred, was that we were trying to turn the broom into a space that was communally governed, that was governed by people who had put a lot of time and energy into the space. And, you know, I think governed in the way such that, unlike social media platforms, a lot of like the time and energy that had been put into a space in order to like share and cultivate wisdom was not being extracted and privatized and used for personal gain, in a way that was unsustainable for the space and all the people who were contributing stuff to the space. So yeah, I can talk a little bit about like how the relationships inside the broom have helped me to cultivate my relationship with myself. But I feel like it's more fitting for me to say that in my general experience, I would say like it's fair to say that the way that relationships have helped me to cultivate a relationship with myself is mostly through like pain and like negative feelings. And I'd like to say that like, I'd like to say that it's mostly been about like love and being taught how to love through like incredible role models, which I feel like speaks to one of the questions afterwards about eldership. But I'd say that like, since I was a very small child, pain and violence has mostly like shown me what exists in myself, which is ready to be released. So recently I spoke on Twitter a little bit about like my relationship with the energy of unconsciousness, where I said that like imagine you could like smell unconsciousness and it was a bad smell, and then imagine that every one of your cells was like screaming at the stench of it. And I'd say that this has been my relationship with unconsciousness during like my early childhood, and then like during the last 3 or 4 years of like this part of my spiritual path. And I'd say that like that relationship with unconsciousness was cultivated through my body basically showing me when I was about to be unsafe. Like I think it's like probably like pretty evident to anybody who's in this container right now, and maybe to a lot of people who might like listen to it later. But you know, like there are forms of unconsciousness which find like blissful or like positive expression. But I would say that like the norm in this realm in current time is for unconsciousness to create space for itself to flourish in bodies, by creating more pain, right? So if you look at this from the perspective of a spirit which is not intrinsically connected to a body and relies upon the awareness of other bodies in order to like survive, then it makes sense to find more and more contexts where you can hijack a body so that it can give attention to you. And in those contexts, when hijacked, it makes sense to try to create rupture in another person's field. And then when that field is ruptured, then that energy becomes available so that they themselves can become carriers or transmitters of the same unconsciousness. So I feel like, to ground this in like a relatively concrete example, like most children who have been yelled at end up being people who yell at other people, right? And you could call this like a transmission vector or a virus of, you know, expressing pain or disappointment by anger. So I would say, like, for most of my childhood, I was like subject to this, and then my body basically started to adapt to this and realize that, like, you know, clouds tend to gather before it rains, right? And that's like my relationship with unconsciousness. I'd say that, like, from the ages of like 6 until probably about the age of like 36, let's say, I essentially like turned that feeling of pain, which attended unconsciousness in my body, into a desire to prove myself. So to become really good at things, because people who are good at things aren't often abused because their skills are needed, or to become like fun to be around for the same reasons. And then, yeah, like around like 35, 36 is like when like my body basically like couldn't take the lack of awareness, or you could say like the amount of awareness which was being given to programming around being good at things and being good to be around, and decided to take some of that awareness back for itself. And you know, the material outcome of that was having like knee surgery and going through that process, and essentially like being unable to play sport, which is something I did like 5 or 6 times a week, formed most of my social groups around, had formed a company, like a clothing company, around like the concept of like sport. And so everything else kind of came crashing down. But I would say, like, as I started to like open up again to those parts of myself that felt unconsciousness as like a visceral, like bad smell in every like cell of my body, it became like really, really difficult to ignore unconsciousness again in other people, and then also in myself. So I think like this is like something that's particular to like my natal astrology, but Pluto is at like the midheaven for me. And I guess like my delineation of that right now is that the way that I am seen ends up surfacing unconsciousness either in myself and in other people, or in other people and or in other people. So yeah, I mean, again, like I'd love to say that like relationships have been this like guiding light for me, and I feel like at times they have been, but I think it's more honest to say that my interactions with people show me unconsciousness, and they show me unconsciousness that lives in my own body. And then you know, like in many different places I've said that relationships are kind of like the most fundamental of egregores or thought forms. So you know, based on like a very strict definition of what a relationship is for me, like it's essentially like something that takes you out of just like the moment in which you are like in the, you know, like holding space with somebody or in container with them. So I'm talking about things like expectations, talking about things like norms, I'm even talking about like the somatic sense that like if I behave in a certain way with somebody, then, you know, like this pattern matching large language model that exists in like my frontal lobe is basically saying like when people do this according to the Beauty and the Beast and like fucking Barbie and Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, then people behave like this to them, right? um and to me, like that's all attention which is like generally unconsciously given to relationships. um and yeah, to wrap up the answer to this question, I'll say that it's through like being in containers or in containment with other people and recognizing unconsciousness that I recognize relationship. And it's through like recognizing relationship that I'm able to gain somatic traction on the unconscious energy which is being given and received by any party to a group container, including a group container of two people. And then through dismembering or like disenmeshing that awareness, I would say I create space to experience myself experiencing interactions with other people. Yeah, does that make sense? I've kind of like redefined a lot of commonly used terms there. I'm curious, Lexi, if that makes sense since you asked the original question. Did I answer the original question? Sweet. Does anybody else have any questions about that? That's my experience, bro. Does anybody want to tell me that my experience was wrong? I dare you. We might talk about that at some point. The power of just speaking about your experience, you know. It does mean you kind of have to keep your hands off of other people's perspective, which is, I feel like, the way a lot of people gain a lot of power, right? Like desire is the cause of all suffering. I'm just like projecting everything into everybody's fucking experience in all spaces and times. And then I'm saying like, I own this, like desire is the cause of all suffering. It's a power grab, right? But if Shakyamuni had just said like, in my experience as a prince who had a baby and walked out on his wife and his baby in the middle of the night to go starve in the forest and gain wisdom and much acclaim, desire is the cause of all suffering. It's like really like weak, right? Like it doesn't like nearly say as much. But like the thing that I'll say about speaking purely from one's own experience is that like no, like how dare anybody else speak about my experience? Like how dare anybody tell me my experience is fucking wrong? You can tell me that my experience is colored by distortion or like unresolved karma, and I'll be like, thank you. Thank you for letting me know that you think that there's unresolved karma in my field. I will be sure to look at that. But I don't think anybody can tell anybody and be correct that their experience is invalid. The second question, I feel like I kind of just like answered, how do I work with karma? But I guess I can expand upon it a little bit. Yeah, I'd say like primarily I work with karma in a somatic way. So like recently I said on Twitter, like, let me know if you want me to like vaporize a demon or something like that. And it felt like a really like outrageous claim, but like my sense, like my experience really is that like, as long as people are like touching experience, then if like their field chooses to offer that experience to me, or like enough like sensory markers or space-time context, like characteristics, and I can track it down and use my body to harmonize whatever like disharmony is created in the body of the person who experiences it. And like that's honestly like my primary way of like working with karma. So I've spoken a little bit before in the room in a few different spaces about how for me like every space-time context is like a room, right? So in each moment you're in a space and you're in a time, in a moment of time, and like as far out as you can project your awareness, you're basically touching every like pixel of space and time. And that could be said to be like an environment or a container. um and then like I would say also that like in each like pixel of space and time in that like environment that you're able to like touch with your awareness, you can also sort of like enter that space-time context and then see every other space-time context from that perspective. So like for me, this kind of speaks to like remembering what it was like to be a child. Like I'm entering this space-time context in which I'm remembering, and then I'm looking at all of the space-time contexts which I occupied as a child from the perspective of this space-time context. And then I can jump into like a space-time context from being a child, like lying on the floor looking at the carpet, into a different space-time context which belongs to my body or not. And yeah, like for me at least, I would say that whatever the body that was connected to that space-time context experienced on like a vibrational level is something that if that body allows me to experience it, I can experience it in my body. And you can almost imagine like dropping pebbles into water and then they cause ripples. And then my body, which is like the body of water, returns to some kind of equilibrium. And in some way, you could say that like what my body had to do in order to re-equilibrate that water is like the complement of whatever caused the water to become rippled in the first place. Which from some perspectives is like karma, right? So if karma is just like action or like the accumulation of all of these different like vibrations that have been felt, which, you know, like mostly for us, like turn into like feelings or turn into like thoughts, then you could probably also imagine how like a stone can be like made of karma on some level. And then you can imagine that like all of the vibrations which led to a stone being a stone fell into water. And then water was able to harmonize the incursion of that stone into water. And that would be like reversing all of the karma that accumulated and resulted in a stone falling into that water. And yeah, there's other ways I've worked with karma. Say like imaginally using visualization techniques, which like rightfully belong to shamanic lineages or are mostly like astrally owned by like Taoish sages or students of theosophy. But I would say the primary way I work with karma is like somatically using my body as a quantum computer to compute inverse waveforms. And yeah, I would say that those are like wisdom codes from timelines where Laniakea is remembered. And yeah, that's probably like a little bit of a different chapter. I think Lexi, you asked this question as well, so I'm going to ask you and anybody else if they feel like this response is like helpful, or would you like to hear more about it or to hear about it in a different way? sometimes when I open this container, I think about like sanghas and like people who sit next to like really ornate arrangements of flowers, sometimes in a very comfortable chair of Danish modern Providence, or sometimes just on the floor. And I'm like, I'm sitting on like a completely shagadelic Bulgarian couch from the 90s, vaporizing like a Zuma with a little cat. But the thing that like makes me think about those kinds of sanghas is just um like the cultivation of a container where people feel like it's safe to ask questions, disagree. I wouldn't say like most of the sanghas I've seen or been in, either like physically or metaphysically, had a lot of disagreement, but I think disagreement is very healthy. I don't think that disagreement has to end in agreement for it to be integrative. Um, and I feel like given that like my body is like literally composed of like different space and time than any of y'all's bodies, I'd be shocked if we can't find something to disagree upon. But maybe one day. Dang, it's almost like 10 p.m. already. I've got 12 minutes to answer a question about how I conceptualize eldership. Oh. Um, I think it's like fair to say that like I can have like a lot of compassion and respect for people who are older than me without defining them as elders. I hope like that's relatable in some way. Um, I'd say that like probably a lot of us feel like our souls come from, I want to say like stars, which are much older than our star, like our solar system. Um, and I feel like also it's probably safe to say that many of us are like sufficiently connected with like what like East Asian folk medicine tends to call like the etheric soul, that we are able to access memories of incarnations or incarnate lifetimes where like the linear time periods that those incarnations were alive go back much further than the incarnate lifetimes of the people who are older than us in our lifetimes, and also maybe like go back further than the incarnate lifetimes that any of the people who are older than us in our lifetime are able to like remember through like an intimate connection with their etheric souls. Which is to say that probably like a lot of us, like I would say definitely me, I feel like my soul is connected to incarnate lifetimes which are much older than many of the people who have like raised me, people who are like older than me in my lifetime and in their lifetimes. Um, so yeah, I think there's a lot of enmeshment in current time from my experience, um, between the concept of like eldership and being old. I don't think that it's possible to unravel all of that karma in our lifetimes, to be honest, but I feel like it's okay for me to say that like for me an elder is somebody who has, well, I'll say that like an elder, like what makes an elder is like completely relational, right? Like you can't be elder if there aren't like people there to be younger, right? And I feel like that's not just like a glib statement, um but I feel like it's like fundamental to like how like I know the concept of eldership. I think the second thing, which is sort of like traditionally venerated in a lot of like traditions which speak of eldership, is that like an elder doesn't call themselves an elder, like other people call them an elder. But I don't think that's like necessarily sufficient for like my definition of eldership. And like, without further ado, I will put my definition of eldership out there to be savaged by all of y'all, which is that like an elder is like a spirit complex which has transmuted enough of its own karma such that it can take up space in the awareness of any other spirit complex without causing the accumulation of karma. Does that make sense? So like, Colin's like thumbs up holding a pencil. I'll say like, in many lineages, they say that like anytime you watch something, like you touch it. So like if I'm looking at a mountain, I use this example a lot, comes from a teacher I know called Kenneth Jover. But like, one time he said to me that he met up with some elders from a shamanic lineage. And I think he said that like they told him the spirits were laughing at him. And he was like, why? And he was like, the spirits say that you don't know that every time you look at something, you're touching it. And this is just my recollection of what Ken said to me. So I think it's like, if we can accept that without necessarily like interrogating it further, even though I'd love to interrogate it further in some container, then we can maybe like understand that like the way that we look at things is a function of our karma, right? Like just like the way a stone falling into water is like, there's no way that it could be falling into water without having some accumulation of everything that led to that stone being a stone and being unsupported by another stone such that it falls and it hits water. So like, if we can accept that every time we look at something, then we're touching it, and we can accept that the way that we look at something is a function of the karma that we've accumulated, then I feel like it's also possible to understand that like when we look at somebody with the karma that we've accumulated, we can cause that karma to enter their field. So, in some places on Twitter, I feel like I've like maybe like turned off a lot of people or upset people by saying like, don't give me metta. Like I think it's like common in like Buddhist, I want to say like technological fields to just be like, oh, like I'm giving you metta. Like I'm just gonna beam metta at you. I'm just gonna beam like loving kindness or forgiveness at you. And like I think like the thing I said is like, don't give me metta because it might not pass my muster, right? Like the amount of compassion, like what you think is compassion, like what you think is like good pizza, to me might be abhorrent. And as you're like beaming this at me, like it's actually like making incursions into my field. And then like I smell like fucking anchovies, right? I love anchovies, but like, like if somebody is not super into anchovies and you beam fucking anchovy meta at them, then they're gonna like smell something and they're gonna get triggered, right? And like people I think often are like, oh, like I don't know why that person like got so mad at me. I was just like sending them meta. I'm just like, yeah, maybe like your meta stinks to them, like maybe like don't send meta to people unless they've asked for it. Or like maybe you can learn what dana really means, which is to like make offerings without being attached. Because like I'm like 99.9% sure that most people who send meta are trying to solve a problem, right? It's like this person's being mean to me, so if I just like care enough at them, then they'll like be deveiled from whatever's causing them to have like what might be a legitimate disagreement with the way that I comport myself. So like the same applies to like elders or anybody who calls themselves an elder, all right? Like anytime they interact with somebody, I would say that like just by being aware that they exist, like they're touching them with some quality of awareness. And I would say that an elder is able to hold the presence of another being in their awareness without touching them word up to, no, I'm not going to say it, too tired, but like without touching them with an awareness, which ends up like causing them to be triggered in some way. And in doing so, I mean, I think this is like, I think people talk about this in like secular psychology nowadays, but like the idea that like somebody, when like their nervous system is dysregulated, is not able to necessarily be present with their experience or able to like integrate their experience. I feel like we take everything I just said and you imagine like a being who is able to be with somebody and like behold their presence and their awareness without causing any amount of triggering whatsoever, then like a clarity kind of like emerges in that container where both people, or like the non-elder, like the younger, can like fully experience like some of that containment in a way that like creates enough clarity for transmission to occur. Which is not to say that like anytime transmission occurs, it's between an elder and a younger. I would say that like there are many contexts where somebody can transmit something to another person and it can be triggering, like in the meta example. There are many contexts where somebody can transmit something to another person without triggering them, without necessarily obviating the possibility that there are contexts where that person might transmit something to them, which is triggering, right? So like I can transmit something to you cleanly on Monday, but maybe on Tuesday, I stink it up. That person's not an elder from the perspective, from my perspective, or the perspective of my lineages. But a person who is an elder, or like I said, like a spirit complex, which is an elder, is one that will only be in contexts with other spirits without causing the accumulation of karma. Yeah. Does anybody have any questions about that? I feel like I'm the only person who's been unmuted in this container, which is not a criticism. I'm just saying, not a criticism of y'all, maybe a criticism of me. This is Nika. Oh, that's cool. Thanks for reflecting that, Anna. Is this going to be the first container I finish early ever? Maybe, I don't know. But I'm going to put the recording probably on YouTube. I feel like the way that Zoom puts together recordings, I'm late already. I feel like the way that Zoom puts together recordings is whoever is unmuted ends up being like on the video. So like, even though y'all have been generous enough to have video on, it's possibly either a relief or an irritation that y'all won't be on the video. But I'm going to upload it to YouTube. I'll post it in Why Am I Like This? I may chop it up so that I have like relatively concise answers to some of the questions and then post them on Twitter. And yeah, like if you're interested in like chopping it up more, discussing, disagreeing, you can do so in the 000 space or anywhere, whether I receive it or not. Thanks for joining me. I guess like we're late for the cacao ceremony, so I'll see some of y'all there. I don't have any cacao late right now, so don't tell Andrew. All right, thank you so much for joining me. Peace.